Hi there, and welcome to this Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your very lucky host, Bruce Hallis. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the show. If you're new to the show, what's the show all about? Well, it's all about information security and helping the security community raise awareness, influence behavior, and foster an appropriate organizational culture where security is truly valued. For those of you who are not new to the show, who have listened before and have come back, thank you very much. Absolute pleasure to have you back on the show. I'm glad that you've got something from previous episodes, which meant that, you're listening in again. It's all about trying to share these insights from the great guests who have been a core part in many ways to the research I've done over the last 6 years into rethinking the human factor, and getting them to share those insights and maybe just giving you some food for thought or some seeds to plant and grow within the work that you do at your organizations when it comes to education and awareness. So who do we have on the show today? Well, today we have a legend. That's right. We've had some amazing people on, the type of people that aren't just sort of recent phenomena or whatever way you want to call it in their own particular discipline. These are people like this guest have been around for years. In fact, I think in the actual interview that we did, he refers to Queen Victoria almost as a, tongue-in-cheek, because he has been doing this for years. And it's the experience of doing this for years and, seeing lots of organizations get it wrong, but also some organizations get it right, as they enabled him to sort of develop this pool of knowledge, this font of knowledge around challenges that everyone faces, okay, that makes him so indispensable and such a legend. So what's this show all about? This show's all about, now I had this sort of epitome where I was when I was doing my research into human factor, suddenly it was like, it's all about change. It's about changing level of sort of awareness. It's about changing behaviors. It's about, arguably changing culture was how I first saw it. And that word change just sent me off in the direction of like, change, bang, Google, let's do change. And he came up. I'd never heard of him before that. This was a number of years ago now when we started the research off. But as soon as I picked up one of his books and I started reading, I was like, oh, this is just making so much sense. And it really does. I mean, it's that you sit there and listen, and there's things going in your head going, oh, I can relate to this very, very much. But it's then how he brings that together and gives some sort of sense of structure about how you might want to tackle that. It's a really great, I'm absolute pleasure to get this living legend on our show. So who is the living legend that is on the podcast today? His name is, I'll give you his full name. His name is Dr. John P. Kotter. Now, when I mention John Kotter to people of a particular age, a particular point in their career, they just like, wow, I can't believe you got him on the show. And there's a whole bunch of us who possibly didn't know who John Kotter is. But hopefully by the end of this, you'll go away and you'll pick up a book and you'll do a bit of research into him. Really, really impressive guy. So without any further ado, let's get on with the interview. John, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Bruce.
So rather than me give an absolutely awful bio of yourself, do you want to just maybe explain to us your background, what you do now, but what's that journey been?
Well, it started in San Diego, California, many years ago, and worked its way across the United States and to where I was educated at the university level, which is here in Boston at MIT in electrical engineering and labor economics, and then an MBA at MIT, and then a doctorate in organizational behavior at Harvard. And I've been on the faculty at Harvard Business School since then, which was right around, I think, Queen Victoria's 30th birthday. So quite a while.
Queen Victoria or Queen Elizabeth?
No, that was a poor attempt at American.
No. I so got it. I really did. But I just needed to double check. I was like, Queen, he's pulling our leg here, isn't he?
And today I'm also chairman of a consulting company that I helped co-found 10 years ago that is taking my work and helping companies with it. And we're located in Seattle and Boston and 8 other locations in the U.S., 2 in Europe and 1 in Asia. And the whole idea is to try to take a lot of research and make it through a consulting vehicle, not just a writing vehicle or like this, a talking vehicle, useful to people as individuals, but mostly for our clients, obviously, as companies or governments. And right now I'm in Boston. Yesterday I was in sunny Sarasota, Florida.
Right.
Where we have a place and where we were for the last 3.5 months working out of. Boston is 30 degrees colder, but it's not raining, so I'm not complaining.
You got to look up on the upside there. You haven't got the rain.
That's right.
You can wrap up against the cold, but the rain is something else.
No, for me at least it is.
Yeah.
But my journey has been one of interest in leadership and in performance, which started when I was young. And I'm not entirely sure why. I was president of my high school class, college fraternity. And I know through that personal experience, I became intrigued. Why? How do you do this stuff well? And what difference can it make? And that took me to the topic of change because, in my opinion, the single biggest factor that's shaping the context in which we all operate, personally and professionally, is an increasing rate of change. It's been that way for a long time, but it's really beginning to have a bigger and bigger effect now. And so much of what we're taught as individuals and so much of what organizations know how to do is based in a different era, basically, a slower moving era, a less volatile era with different issues. Certainly cybersecurity wasn't even a word that a typical person would have heard of 20 years ago. And trying to figure out how to best describe those individuals and organizations that can kind of flow and take advantage of the change and not get ground down by it.
Yeah.
And then helping people with that is great fun.
Yeah.
And I enjoy it enormously.
Mm-hmm.
And I do it out of, like I say, Sarasota, Boston, and a nice little lake up in New Hampshire called Squam Lake, where if you remember the motion picture that won an Academy Award the year it was out with called On Golden Pond.
Right.
That's Squam Lake. That's where they shot it.
Okay. Is that why you've got an office there? And is it on the lake?
Well, I've got an office everywhere.
Right.
You know. But that's where we used to spend the entire summers when the kids were growing up. I have two children.
Yeah.
And now they're gone, and my wife and I kind of go back and forth between there and Boston during the summers. It's a nice place to sit with your feet up thinking, reflecting on what you've been learning from the last, year or so.
And I think that maybe there's an important lesson there for our listeners. Sometimes you need to step back, even from the physical location where you do a lot of your day-to-day. I think sometimes you need to step back from it, detach from it, and get into a different environment where you can be allowed to be maybe more reflective rather than doing. Do you think that that's something you get from the experience of Swan Lake?
Oh, yeah, there's no question about that. I even can remember the initial written work that came out, published first in Harvard Business Review and then as a book from Harvard Business School Publishing under the title Leading Change.
Yep.
Was written handwritten. This is before I'd even switched to computers.
Wow. Okay.
On the dining room table up at this lake house.
Right.
Across from the fireplace and with no city noise and no people running around. There's no question that, and part of the challenge for so many people today is their jobs are so absorbing, they're never offline. And it's been made worse by these wonderful things that make our lives in some ways better, which, like the thing I carry in my pocket all day long.
Right. It's not your handkerchief, is it?
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So your point about having some time to step back and having some time to reflect, to get a more clear picture of whatever you're thinking about, your situation or somebody else's situation, I think is not only a good point, it's a problem for a lot of people today, and it's being made worse by all of the millions of ways that keep us plugged into the center of activity.
Yeah. And I think that sort of maybe that brings us nicely around to that. You're talking about how we are so plugged in, but we haven't evolved to handle the world that we're in. And I think that's a key part of, when I read your book, and I've read pretty widely about evolution as well, and the effect it's had on us on a physical, but also on a sort of conscious level. That's a key thing that comes through from you. And you sort of reflected right at the beginning of this conversation that we're having, that we just haven't evolved to be able to handle where we're at.
No, I talked to the serious brain scientists a lot during the last 2 years, because I'm convinced they've learned a lot over the last 20 years. And if you connect then to the evolutionary biologists, what you come up with is that our hardwiring, if you will, brain-body hormonal system, first of all, comes from a long time ago. I mean, a long time ago, in which life was so different, it's hard to comprehend. Not the least of which is the main challenge was literally the struggle for survival.
Yeah.
Getting enough to eat, not freezing to death during the winter. I mean, pretty basic things.
Yeah.
And through evolution, we developed a very, very, very powerful set of systems in our heads and in our nervous systems and in our hormonal systems that basically have a set of a kind of a radar, if you will, that's constantly, even when we sleep to a lesser degree, looking for threats. And as soon as that radar perceives a threat, it sends off some signals, chemical signals and electrical signals, that makes our heartbeats a little bit faster, more oxygen, and might go to the bloodstream, more blood to the muscles. We go into kind of a fight or flight posture. Anxiety goes up, maybe anger too.
Yep.
And our mind focuses like a laser on what the radar says is the threat. And we spring into action. That's the way the system's set up, rather, without thinking, to eliminate the threat.
Yeah.
And, and that saved us from countless being eaten by saber-toothed tigers, I guess.
Yeah.
But that system is with us today, and it is enormously powerful. And that radar is reading all kinds of things that are not saber-toothed tigers. But nevertheless, it's been programmed, if you will, by our experiences to believe is a threat. And with the very noisy world we live in, if we don't watch out, we don't know it because this doesn't happen consciously. We're in this survive mode a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And by the way, in that mode, good luck for doing anything creative. Good luck for being curious, reflective. Good luck for innovation, or making anything fundamentally change that's going to require effort and time, because that mode is all short-term oriented, highly focused, and yet it is built into us.
Yeah.
And it is, as you said in introducing this whole topic, it is out of tune with current reality. Now, the good news is we also have in that hardwiring system something that is much newer in evolutionary history, that if the first system might usefully be called the survive system, this is called the thrive system. It's much weaker in the sense that it's been around a lot less, and it activates with more difficulty. But its radar system looks for opportunities.
Right.
And when it sees opportunities, emotionally we become more excited. We don't spike in the fight or flight way,
right,
but become, kind of excited. Our minds, if anything, will broaden out,
right,
because we want to understand the opportunity so we can take advantage of it, and that is almost always impossible without some curiosity and some broader reflective thinking. Although, if you stay in survive mode too long, you burn out. You literally stress out. You can stay in thrive mode a long time, as long as you get feedback that you're making progress.
Right. Okay.
And that mechanism is why we not only have, as Homo sapiens sapiens, survived the last 300,000 years, despite the fact that millions of other species have not. The thrive mode is why we rule the earth. It's the one that's brought us out of the savannah and out of caves. And it's the world that we really see when we look around us. We've invented it, a remarkable amount of what we see every day. We've invented in a fraction, the teeniest fraction of human history.
Yeah.
Very, very recent. And the speed with which all these elements are interacting outside, offering new opportunities, continues to go up. So and that's the good news part of the story. The bad news, though, is that the number of people and organizations that are kind of stuck more on the survive side, not in the sense of serving the original purpose of literally keeping you alive, but hung up chasing all of these little perceived threats in organizations, political or whatever, is draining energy and keeping us from achieving. And survive gets going strong enough, it kills off. It just shuts down the thrive side.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem for individuals and organizations everywhere today.
To handle, and I think it's that difference between there's, almost from a business perspective, there's surviving, but it's also then taking advantage of the opportunity to thrive.
Right.
And the gap between the two requires change. And people say they want to change. They want the organization to levels of awareness to change. They want the organization's behaviors to change. They want the organization's culture to change. But there's a difference between saying it and actually doing it effectively. Because there is doing it, okay, but there's doing it effectively. And I think that was one of the things that came from reading your books. When I was reading them, and I was drawing parallels with people that I speak to day in, day out, but also my own personal experiences of where I failed when I kicked off a project around cybersecurity. And I think, it's understanding that, if people are in that threat mode for the reasons that you've been explaining, that makes change. That makes them either driving change or being part of change, which is ultimately still, I guess, driving change. That makes their ability to effectively do that a lot less likely to happen, a lot less effective. And these people that come up with the opportunities for advancing an organization, so it's not about survival, it's about, prospering and taking advantage of the opportunities, they get frustrated. They say, look, I've got this vision, I've got this, we can see this opportunity, we need to get there, but we need everybody, all 10,000 employees or 50 employees to buy into that. And I think that's a challenge that we see day in, day out within the industry. How do you've got this great idea. I mean, you would call it a vision, but actually, how do you go about that?
Yeah, if you study enough cases where organizations have been really successful at making big changes that paid off for their customers, employees, investors, etc. And then study a lot of cases where the changes either were needed and never got started, or were tried and failed, or after a while and a lot of stress and a lot of money, they achieved a fraction of what they aspired to. Mm-hmm. So the positive versus the kind of negative cases, there really are clear patterns. And although they do evolve as the world moves faster, the patterns are, it's not as if they change every day. Organizations, you have to set the stage. Making organizations, the things that we know of as school systems and manufacturing companies and city governments, any form of religious organizations, any form of organization, this is a relatively modern creature. If they're of any size, say 100 or more people, and they were built to take advantage of new technologies that came with the Industrial Revolution. And they were basically created because the original entrepreneurs, when they got past, 10 people, discovered that coordinating everybody and getting things done was tricky. I mean, and if you had 1,000 people, my goodness, how do you do that? And so they invented what we now call management, and they invented what we now think has been around forever. It has not, which is the modern organization, whose primary purpose is to take lots and lots of people and capital equipment and the like, and do something, provide a product or service efficiently and reliably. So controlled. You put 1,000 people together and you get chaos unless you have a whole lot of mechanisms to make sure that they somehow, they know what to do and they do it and they don't bump into each other. And one of the consequences of that is that a well-managed organization that is very efficient and reliable is very much oriented toward getting it right and then keeping it right. Keeping it right means not changing.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And that's really interesting for listeners. I think what John's pointing to there is how an organization can come up with something, and then it's about almost the efficiencies of delivering that, but in the process of developing your organizational structure, and I guess recruiting the right people, getting the skills and aptitudes, etc. It's all about survival of where you currently at.
Correct.
And that causes a problem, because then those type of people aren't aligned, I guess, at the heart to change. It's more about maintaining the status quo, which is a bias that I often talk about.
Right.
Okay.
So we've got two things working against us. Human nature which has a dominant trait toward survival, and organizations and management systems which have a bias toward doing something right, efficiently, reliably, and no matter what, which means whatever that product is, just being great at it. And whatever the rules are, not breaking the rules. And whatever the process is, performing that process right, which, of course, like the survival system, does nothing to help you make significant, creative, useful changes.
So people in the security profession would argue the case that what they're doing is, at a minimum level, helping an organization to be resilient, almost to survive. And then for many years, I've argued the case that actually there is a greater demand. There is a requirement out there which you can differentiate upon in terms of how much people can trust you with their data.
Right.
So what happens when you see this opportunity for change? Well, one, you're either driven to change, or two, you see the opportunity for change. Sort of how important. See, when I think about the work that you do, I remember you referring to sort of like common mistakes that people make.
Yeah.
The whole point about complacency. So that it's, for me, it's almost like we have to do this because we're required by our regulator to do this. Okay.
Right.
And then there's another thing where we have to do this because actually this is going to help us win business because we're pitching for business here and we're coming up against these regular questions about, how mature are we when it comes to cybersecurity and, things like educating our employees. And that's a different driver because one's driven by a competitive stance, which is, revenue and profit. The other one's driven by the need to just comply. So do you want to just let us know the importance of addressing the issue of complacency when it comes to changing anything?
Yeah. No, one of the biggest barriers to fast, effective, useful change is complacency. And complacency is, it's almost amazing at times. If you're on the outside and you're looking at a company and you see its problems so clearly because you're not tied up in it. And yet you see all these smart people, maybe they'll acknowledge, yeah, we've got some problems, yawn. Or they'll be, if they're honest with you, they'll say, people overstate the problems all the time. We've been around for 50 years. We've been around for 100 years. We know what we're doing, da-da-da-da-da. And complacency is therefore very, very dangerous in a world that is moving and changing quickly. There's another cousin of complacency that I call false urgency. And this is where people admit, oh, yeah, there are problems. No question about that. Ooh, threats, And they're running around in circles, but it's all driven by the survive thing. It's anxiety.
Yeah.
And once people go into personal survive mode, they're not worried about cybersecurity. They're not worried about more competition or a new product that a competitor is offering. They're worrying about their own skin. And good people are that way because that's the way we're biologically programmed.
Yeah.
And I call it false urgency because if you're the boss and you're at corporate headquarters in the corner office and you look around, everybody seems to be, coming in early and they're racing around in circles and they're holding meetings and get 63 projects going on. And to you, it doesn't look like people are being complacent at all. And
No, very busy. But
yeah. But it's not a productive busyness. It's a survive-driven busyness, which in some ways is worse than complacency, because over time it wears people down, and it wears organizations down, so they don't have the mental or physical or emotional energy to take on whatever the task is.
And I guess it's the false sense of security. But you look what's going on around you. You see a lot of people. I mean, I've come across this when I've seen organizations that have had some sort of issues in relation to cybersecurity, and suddenly there's a massive recruitment drive, and there is a lot of work that's suddenly done, and suddenly the money appears, and this is not unusual at all, but there is, and everybody looks busy, and so people get this warm feeling.
Sure.
But it's a false, ultimately
Sure.
for me, the people at the top, the leadership and the most senior management, it's a false sense of security. And part of being a leader, I think, well, correct me wrong, because you've got a lot more experience in this, but part of being a leader is about almost having a sense of, look, I've got this vision, and we've got a plan about how we're going to achieve that vision. Okay, and I can see how things are moving along those lines. And yes, there's a little bit of wiggle room because the vision changes and plans change. We accept that, but that's what gives you the assurance, is that it's a structured approach behind a vision.
Yeah, which ultimately you need people to buy into, as you said earlier, and too often, especially if you're under stress and are very busy. It's amazing how a senior executive can allow themselves to fool themselves about how much buy-in they really have. They end the meeting by saying, okay, guys, what do you think? Everybody on board here? And heads nod, but nobody says no.
No. Yeah.
And yet half the room or more is thinking either A, I'm not really sure, or B, this is stupid, or C, he's almost got it right, but it's not right. It should be this. That doesn't get processed. The boss goes away with his false sense of security. And you can imagine that means whatever his vision is, it's not going to happen.
So you get a boss with a vision. So the first thing is you've got to have a clear vision, and a clear vision that everybody buys into. And in your work, you often talk about the coalition, the guiding coalition, which I sort of use a horrible phrase of stakeholder management.
Yeah.
Is stakeholder management and the guiding coalition, is it sort of the same thing?
It is very much related.
Okay.
It is not the exact same thing, because there are people who take you call it stakeholder management, right?
Mm-hmm.
Management,
different to leadership. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right. A guiding coalition, when it's working well, first of all, is not structured in a kind of traditional hierarchy where we all have, different levels and titles. It's more of a network organization. And what people do in it is they do manage some things, but a lot of what they do is to provide leadership to make sure that the vision or the opportunity is indeed capitalized on. So they're related, but all too often, the people who draw up, not always, but all too often, stakeholder maps, etc., do it as a part of a kind of a mechanical management control process.
Mm.
And that isn't what drives difficult and significant changes.
It's more of a governance.
Yeah.
Governance is that management piece around maybe a program of work, whereas what you're talking about, the coalition, is it's amongst the leadership team in particular. But I imagine people that deputies of all the leadership.
Yeah. sometimes it's useful to have the unusual candidate, or more than one unusual candidate, a part of that, because they see things that are almost invisible at the executive level. So they bring data and connections that can be very useful when you're trying to help people to understand something and convince them it's a good idea.
So with that guiding coalition, do you have to have a vision before you have the guiding coalition?
No, I don't think so. If you do, and the guiding coalition then has to, in the best case, kind of massage it a bit to make it their own, because you really want them to not just think, this is Harry's vision, and it is logical. You want them to think, this is our vision.
Yeah.
And it's not only logical, it's exciting.
Yeah.
But you do need, I think it helps a lot, even before in putting a guiding coalition together, to have them think about opportunity, especially if they don't normally, if they spend their lives basically solving problems, i.e. eliminating threats, to kind of put them through some kind of exercise that loosens them up, gets them thinking about what the opportunities are, and starts bringing them together as a group around what are the big opportunities for us, from which you can then go on and say, all right, if we're going to capitalize on this, this is what it might look like in 5 years. There's a vision. And here are some strategic initiatives that we could launch right now that would help us to start getting real movement toward that vision and that opportunity.
Yeah. How important do you think that the process of communicating the vision is? Because
you can't understate. I mean, I wrote, I don't have the book next to me, but any number of times in the past that you can find places where the effective change, you kind of quantify how much communication was going on.
Yeah.
Especially in trying to help people get on board, want to get on board.
Yeah.
And the failed cases, and the difference isn't, 50%. I mean, it's a factor of 50. I mean, it's just so large. It's almost incomprehensible. And indeed, to the failed cases, it was incomprehensible. They had their notion of how you communicate. You send out the memo.
Yeah.
You hold a meeting, one meeting of which 20 minutes is devoted to the Vision 2023,
right.
And the assumption is, or you turn it over to corporate communications, and they message it and cascade it down the organization. And if you add up all of that stuff, it's nothing in the life of a typical person.
Yeah.
If I'm hearing about your vision, 0.01% of the time, and 99.9% of the time I'm hearing about other things, why would you ever expect that I'm going to A, understand, B, embrace, C, get excited about your vision? It's just one little blip in this torrential information storm in which we live.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a sort of a biases perspective, That's something what they call availability heuristic, which is that it might have arrived at some point, but it's long gone because it's been swamped by everything else. It's just not available. Right. If you're not in the forefront of mind, then people aren't thinking about you. So it's not an ongoing thing. And I think it's really interesting there, because when I think about cybersecurity, whether that be rolling out a whole program of work or just rolling out the education and awareness piece, the frequency with which the vision is communicated to all stakeholders is really, really low. And one of the interesting things that we've been working upon is looking at actually how long people remember that message in the first place. So it's great that you make people aware and you invest in, maybe doing one of these townhouse meetings, and you make it available online so people can dial in even if they're asleep all over the world. And maybe you record it as well. But actually, how long do people remember that? Even if they're mandated to watch it, how long do they remember it? It's if you look at people like Ebbinghouse's work from many, many years ago about how quickly we forget things. Oh yeah, it's just barely remembered.
And one of the things we've learned in studying leadership and change is that messages that have a strong emotional content that connects to somebody have a stickiness that non-emotional messages, even if they're brilliant, simply don't. Stickiness in the sense that they'll be remembered longer. Okay?
Right.
Because you hit a part of our brain, another part of the brain, and they're memorable. You can remember this dramatic something, or this tearful exchange, or whatever, or this really exciting something that you saw. But for the average, dry message that's passed around every day, it goes in and out fast.
Which makes me wonder, the whole cascade system of getting a message across. If it comes from the heart, from a leader or from a leadership team, from that guiding coalition, and they do genuinely believe in it, it carries that emotion with it if you genuinely believe. Right. But as soon as you start passing the message on to other people, to pass it on to other people, to pass it on to other people, does that emotion carry through? Or are we then into that management piece you spoke about earlier, which is now I've got the message, I've got to pass it on. So you find the most efficient way of passing it on.
Very good.
Yeah. And he doesn't have the thing that makes it sticky, the emotional connection.
No, that's it. And that can happen right at the top.
Yeah.
In other words, it can turn into a dry, emotional, efficiently managed cascading process right below the CEO.
Yeah.
I mean, we've dealt with, I know, 2 companies right now that have, I think, fantastic CEOs, but their executive teams, and when they're in the room, people just light up and, stop looking at their email and pay attention and go out and want to talk about what the CEO said, because it's somehow it grabs them, and both of them know tricks that humans have known for millennium, like telling stories, interesting stories.
Yeah.
Not just giving facts. But in both of their cases, half of their executive team, at least, doesn't get that. So maybe they get a little bit excited about it, but their instinct is to, when they cascade it the next level down, to do it in a very check the box, efficient way, which drains all of the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
So it's not even achieving anything at the first level of its cascade.
Yeah.
And by the time it gets to the bottom, it's zero, if not flip back to creating a certain cynicism, because some people can see this happening and they say this is nuts.
Yeah. So I guess when we think about under communicating vision, then there's two types of under, isn't there? There's like under communicating in terms of the frequency with which you're actually getting the vision out to the audience. Yep. Okay. I guess there's also under communicating in terms of actually getting out to everybody in the audience. And then the third one, I guess, is, because I said two, but actually I'm thinking three. The other one about under communicating was almost like under communicating in terms of under communicating the emotional side of it.
Right.
Okay. And I do wonder, when I guess there'll be listeners here, and there's work that I've done in the past where you get this enthusiasm, and then it's like, okay, we're going to use internal comms to get this out, and then suddenly hit the internal comms policy, and guidelines, and it starts to strip things out. And
right,
it's just I've done quite a lot of work around the use of color, for example, and what seems to be more engaging, and in different cultures, the effect in different cultures. So when you start to see the stats, and you start to realize that actually different colors in different sort of cultures and different nations, or with different religious backgrounds, for example, whatever. And then you say, okay, we know that these things, with A/B testing has been done, okay, and we know that these colors seem to suit communicating with these members of our organizational team, okay, community, in these particular places. But the guidelines say that you've got to use this color, you've got to use this font, you've got to do it this way. Right. And you're like, sometimes we are our own worst enemy. Is that something you come across as a challenge within the context of change?
Of course, the barriers to change, in this case, we'll call it the color policy.
Okay.
Right? Are just about infinite inside organizations.
Yeah.
And ones that overcome that, they overcome it because they get enough people into not just not resisting, but actually helping. And not helping because the boss, burst into their office saying, Joe, I need you on one more assignment here. But because they hear about the opportunity, they hear about the vision, they talk about it with some of their people. Who knows? Maybe they see some colorful things on the walls. Maybe it's because somebody has spontaneously thrown some kind of a party associated with it. I mean, the possibilities are endless depending upon the specifics. But you get enough people who essentially want to do it, so they're taking on not a second job, a night job, but they are in a way.
Yeah.
They're going to do their job, and they're also a part of a volunteer army, if you will, for overcoming all the barriers that get in the way of change.
Yeah.
And you get enough of these people working on spotting in advance the barriers and then using their creativity to figure out how to get around them. And that's how you make, large rocks go up mountains, despite the fact that even a tank can't push them up. And the typical organization today has no clue on how to get that level of kind of engagement. The managerial mindset worries to death that level of engagement will create chaos. Right?
Yeah.
You turn all people loose and tell them to eliminate barriers. Oh my God. They'll violate 10,000 policies.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to happen.
Yeah.
Because remember, we're not talking about hiring 10,000 new people to change the company. We're relying on the regular staff, at least the people who want to become involved in this.
Yeah.
And we've got some kind of a mechanism for leading it in a guiding coalition, and some clarity about direction through opportunity and vision. And what at the extreme is possible, we see again and again through the consulting work we've been doing, is outcomes that the people themselves at the beginning said were not possible.
Right.
So much more is possible. I mean, that's something that either inspires me if I'm in a good mood or makes me furious and want to throw furniture against the wall if I'm in a bad mood.
Yeah. Me as an individual, I'm an absolute believer in change. I think things can constantly be better. I think as humans, we've done that. Initially, like we were pointing out earlier, the whole evolutionary piece about just surviving was good enough. And then once we were in a position where we were surviving. It's interesting. I was doing a talk on this last week at an event, and I was talking about, once we got to that point of being able to survive comfortably, and we were able to rely upon, for example, having food on a relatively consistent basis with some risks and threats going on, then you started to find that you could have some people that concentrated on the production of food, and some people their time was freed up, and they could actually start to explore other things which were more about growth.
Yeah.
And as the security profession is quite like a lot of our jobs nowadays, a lot of things that we earn a living by or we're just fascinated by, a lot of that, the time to be able to be a security specialist, to specialize in educational management, to do management consulting, these sort of thinking livings, that's all down to evolutionary success.
Right.
Yeah. If we hadn't been able to survive, we then wouldn't have been able to move on to thriving.
Right.
Yeah. So I want to ask something. Short-term wins. Okay.
Yep.
I think one of the things that I learned many moons ago from a behavioral perspective is that giving people feedback as quickly as possible, to remind them that they're doing the right thing, and almost like it's a success story. And I know that you're an absolute believer in the importance of sort of setting out, if you're going to bring about change, part of that plan about bringing about change is identifying that you're going to look for quick success stories. And that means designing success stories in relatively quickly.
Right.
And it's a horrible phrase, and I don't know if I should be using this one. It's definitely not management consultant language. But it's that low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
I mean, some people pull back at that and go, no, because once we've got the low-hanging fruit, then everybody takes their foot off the accelerator and thinks that the job's been done.
Right.
What's your view on the need for quick wins, for success stories to keep people motivated? And do sometimes quick wins end up actually becoming your enemy because people think the job's done?
Correct. Okay. Big issue. Yes, you need the quick wins, because what you're doing is you're trying to build momentum. You're trying to get more people to buy in, more people to kind of volunteer, more people engaged helping, and credibility of the vision or the statement of what the opportunity is a huge issue at the beginning. And one of the ways, and perhaps the most powerful way that you deal with the issue, is by demonstrating that what you're talking about is not silly. Look, we just managed to do this, and we did it in 30 days. We do a lot of 90-day activities to help firms do something that catches people's attention.
Yeah.
That's in line with the vision and the opportunity, and that people would have said not possible. That helps. Remember, the thrive part of our human hardwiring can continue unlike the survive side, which burns out after a while, for a long period of time, if it gets feedback that it perceives you're making progress.
Yeah.
And critical, nothing is better feedback that is convincing that you're making progress than real little successes.
Yeah.
And you are right. After a series of successes, people who are, for whatever reason, are uncomfortable with the whole thing will sometimes come out and try to get you to declare victory way before you won.
Yeah.
We've done A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. It's more than we dreamed of. Victory. Now let's talk about my issue.
Yeah.
And the way you get around that is by this constant, continuous communication that creates that sense of urgency around the opportunity, which clearly hasn't been fully capitalized on yet, and the buy-in to the vision, which clearly hasn't been realized yet. And the more that people hear, and therefore can see the gap still between all the successes and yet what the opportunity is and what the vision is, the more they'll hang in there.
Yeah.
The more they don't see that, because that isn't being communicated well enough, with enough, bang behind it, the more you are subject to the problem of quitting, basically, too soon.
A question, because you mentioned there about how, with the work that you do and your team, you mentioned there the quick wins on a sort of a 90-day, turnaround period. That's what you're looking at. You mentioned the first 30, but then you mentioned what you do at 90. Is that because a lot of the organizations that sort of are focused upon this sort of more mature approach to change that you're sort of driving? Is it because they've got quarterly reporting back to investors? Is that what drives that decision to look at that period, that particular period, or is it something else that makes you think we look at 90 days?
Well, I think the mere fact that you're right, reporting tends to be quarterly, which is 90 days. That has to be floating around in this somewhere. But I think there's something about 90 days which seems relatively short as opposed to the operating plan, which is for a year, let's say. And yet it gives you enough time, if you go about it correctly, to really get something of substance done.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a feasible time to achieve something of significance if you know what you're doing. And for a variety of reasons, it psychologically seems feasible but quick.
Yeah.
And your market point could be reporting to the markets could be a part of it.
Yeah. I just wondered there as well, because there was the point is 90 days, because often people ask me, what's realistic in terms of time? And the first thing I sort of go back to them is, what is the objective?
Right.
So you might have, 90 days is fine, as long as you're very clear before the 90 days kicks off. What is the objective? How is it where are we in relation to that objective? What is our plan to get us from where we are to where we want to be? And you make decisions like, are we talking about doing this across the whole of an organization, or are we going to just do it within the limited scope? So you have to do that thinking up front.
Right.
Before you then kick into the 90 days. And the 90 days is like where you're sort of almost measuring this, you're rolling this out, and then you're measuring it over the 90 days, but you're not doing the thinking and planning as part of the 90 days.
Right. Or you have to be very good and very efficient and have some, kind of sophisticated tricks, if you will, to do that thinking and planning quickly. Because if that stretches out, obviously, and it's part of the 90 days, you do run out of time.
Yeah.
Which is your point. But remember, these little wins can be very important to give momentum to a larger process that can take 1 year, 2 year. When you talk about cultural change in a big old company, thinking in terms of anything less than 5 years is naive.
Yeah.
It just takes time. That doesn't mean, nothing happens usefully except for investment, if you will, for 5 years. You can start doing it in a way that starts helping you get results immediately with some of these quick wins. But as you say, clarity around the objective. If the objective is cultural change and the context is old and big, it's going to take time. And don't kid yourself about that. It's just, it amazes me still a few years ago where a European company, not the UK, huge, well-known, new CEO, and he declares, the culture is from the past. It's undermining their growth. They're going to change it. And he appoints a staff group like 3 levels down from him to lead the charge and declares it's going to be done in a year for 100,000 employees all over the globe. And you kind of say, what? What?
Well, you can't take away from there's ambition and there's a sort of and there's craziness, isn't there? There was just like that's not going to happen unless, of course, you separate the company out into 2 separate legal entities, and the one legal entity that you're going to work upon has got maybe 20 staff.
There you go. That'll do it.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, the one person I talked to about this, and I told him, don't accept this job. This is after a year, you're going to have to wiggle your way out of a failure.
Yeah.
But I said one approach, if his 1 year thing is inviolate, is to try to convince him to focus on some piece of the company that is relatively small and that has leadership that connects easily to culture as a concept and is excited about the idea.
Yeah.
And focus there. And so it becomes a learning project, a demonstration project from which you can build. Unfortunately, this person totally ignored me and is now, I hope for them, having a good time working at a different company.
Yes, I think the question of being realistic about the timescales is a really important one. People often talk to me about security culture, and I'm sort of, for me, I know we in the cyber industry we use this phrase security culture. I'm sort of unconvinced. I sometimes wonder why we would want to have a separate culture to the organizational culture, and actually that causes more problems than not.
Right.
But I guess the other thing in relation to that sort of time scales, because actually when I spoke, for me, culture is something that's going to take 3 to 10 years. depending on the context and the nature of organization, even the industry in that type of thing. But also things just change in terms of what the customers want. And it's interesting how the culture will get driven by the culture of the actual market. What our customers are expecting. And but I got a question for you. I don't know if you've ever come across this scenario, but it's definitely a scenario that we come across. Generally, data protection, data privacy, cybersecurity, all those type of things. Okay, increasingly, there's governments are intervening through the use of regulation.
Yep.
And often, what you'll see is organizations that maybe have a breach has come to light, and the regulator's been involved, and maybe there's been an investigation by the appropriate government regulator, or the Senate or the House of the Parliament here in the UK, whatever. And part of the remedial action afterwards, part of the problem that's identified, is the culture within an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then they come up with an agreement about a remedial plan to make the regulator happy.
Right.
And then the regulator puts in place, you've got to have this done within 2 years or 3 years.
Right.
Now, for me, we're not, taking the realistic view upon change. Are the regulators causing problems for us? Because, in effect, they're saying that this is the timescale you've got to address the issue of security culture, or the culture of the organization with regards to this. And then does that, the need to be able to report within, by the end of 3 years, we've addressed culture. Could that, on one hand, the regulators there trying to drive better security, not within just the organization, but across the whole, the whole economy, and they want to put a timescale on it. But are they sort of missing the point here that really you might be setting an unrealistic target, which means that the whole approach is much more focused on tick boxing and not really about cultural change, but at least being on it's showing a veneer of change, and that's not really going to bring about what we need.
When a regulator basically comes up with an unrealistic solution, which they force on an organization, they send the organization into survive, which means people will be thinking, how do we fudge things, basically, to get the regulator off our backs?
Yeah.
That'll be the focus, which is not what the regulator or society wants, obviously.
No.
One way around that is to think through carefully what is realistic over time. So it's kind of leading and lag variables that show you're making progress. What if they go about this right? Could they realistically accomplish in 6 months that shows they're on their way on their journey?
Mm-hmm.
And what after 12, and what after 24, all the way out to whatever the end is. And if the end is 3 to 10 years, so be it, which doesn't set off alarm bells. This is impossible. This is nuts. These guys don't know what they're doing. If presented correctly, and then is taken by the executive committee as okay, let's think how we can turn this to our advantage. We'll do it. This will actually be an asset when we get it in place.
Mm.
And if we can do it better and faster than the competition or whatever, some opportunity-oriented logic. So if it's realistically from a time scale point of view, and the leadership of the company can A, point that out, and B, point out the opportunity associated with it, then you've got some basis for getting a change started that is more on the kind of thrive side of the brain, if you will, not the survive side.
Yeah.
and something that could evolve over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years quite successfully. That we don't see more of that right now is not good.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting point that, that there is the role in post-incident, the role of the regulator in terms of holding organizations to account to address the cultural aspects which have maybe led to to a breach. I think they have a really important role to play. But, and I think, we've sort of hit it on the nail on the head there with the sense of, if you don't give people enough time, they will go into this, fight and flight mode, in effect, the survival piece. And actually, that's not the mindset you want people in. On a deeply biological level, the chemistry is not right.
Yeah, exactly.
And, chemistry is, you've got to have the chemistry in place for that opportunity mindset to be there, and you see the opportunity that can come from this. And I think it's quite interesting. I remember going back to one of my early reads or one of the books that you wrote, which was the Leading Change book. About that complacency point, which we started on. It must be an hour and 20 minutes ago that we started having this chat. But going back to that complacency point, the sense of urgency.
Yeah.
And the need to have something that's really, really urgent, but also it's not just urgent, it's got to be urgent and something that people feel they can achieve. They've got a realistic chance of making a difference.
Correct.
And there's an opportunity driving this rather than, we're just trying to sweep everything under the carpet and see the back of this.
The real sense of urgency around an opportunity that is felt strongly by large numbers of people can be an incredibly powerful force and source of advantage in a fast-moving world.
John, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. It's been brilliant.
Bruce, my pleasure.
Okay, so that was John Kotter. And he hasn't been around since Queen Victoria's time. I do believe it's Queen Elizabeth. I think, but I've been so looking forward to doing that interview. I really am very, very lucky that I get to interview some amazing people. The sort of people that have been really leading the process of challenging the status quo within industries about the challenges, including, for example, John's very much around sort of change and consulting within the concept of change. So absolute pleasure on the show and to push ideas around. And I do think, as I'm talking, and I hope as you were listening, you were sort of like, there were little chimes going off saying, oh yeah, I know that problem. I mean, often for me, when I work with people, there's some massive event has happened, and the result is that there's this impetus for change. But I think that, we were going through some key points there about how things go wrong. So, and I think the phrase we used was about burning money. You can invest huge sums of money in security, but at the end of the day, there are a number of these barriers that if you don't address them, your return on investment is going to be limited. The comfort you actually get from that investment is going to be, more comfort than reality. So really important. So if any of you are having challenging conversations within the business around the need for change, and there are barriers that you're hitting across, and we talk about these barriers when we do our risk assessment courses, then these are the sort of things that John was raising and we were discussing, which should help you sort of think ahead about what those barriers are going to be and prepare for them. I can't tell you how important the whole thinking ahead and preparing piece is. So something I've been a great believer in for many years is the concept of positioning. So, if you actually speak to a marketeer about positioning, it's about positioning yourself, to overcome the next barrier that you face. And John Kotter is very much around, we talked about, how do you get around barriers that you hit as you're trying to put a program through. And it's actually about thinking ahead. It really is very often about thinking ahead. And positioning is about positioning to think of those barriers as well. So really, really important. There's so much to take away from that particular chat with John, and it was an absolute pleasure and a sort of privilege to have him on the show. If you like that sort of stuff, then how can you stay best informed of what's coming down the pipeline? Couple of different ways you can do that. Subscribe to the podcast, which you can do by visiting the www.marmaladebox/podcast page. And there are a number of ways that you can subscribe there. Another way, if you're on LinkedIn, is to join the LinkedIn Rethinking Human Factor group, which is an active group, and we post on a weekly basis. And we ask our members of the group to get involved in the discussions. And even if they want to post something themselves, we've had some members of the group posting challenges that they've had. It's been great to have some feedback from other members of the group as well. So just to let you know, it's an active group. The stuff posted on a weekly basis. And it's really interesting stuff as well. The stuff that we, as part of our ongoing research, because we have an ongoing research program, it's about the stuff that we flag, which we find interesting. A lot of it comes from within the information security industry, but also actually increasingly, a lot of it is about trying to share articles from outside security, which relate to specifically the challenges of awareness, behavior, and culture. Because, hey, you know what? They're not unique to cybersecurity. So, we try and share that stuff that we find interesting as well. Another way that you can stay in contact with us is to subscribe to the Marmalade Box weekly update. And in that, we shall share a brief few words upon things that we have been up to during the week, things that we found interesting. I know that we did one a little while ago, which was completely inspired by a radio program that I listened to in the morning and a discussion around Brexit, if Brexit is of any interest to you whatsoever. But, we found the hidden sort of security analogy in that, and we sort of pulled it out, and it was like a really interesting sort of, have you thought of it in this context, and what lessons can you take away from negotiating around Brexit, and actually what does that mean within the context of information security? So, if you'd like to be challenged, then, sign up to that, and that comes out on a weekly basis as well. I love sharing what I learn. And I do that through a variety of workshops that I run, but also a number of courses. And the workshops are really they're structured, but they're sort of free-flowing. It's about challenging everybody that attends to sort of rethink the human factor and really throw some of the insights that we learned through all the research we've done over the 6 years in to really get you back to the basics. Because often listeners, you folks, you just don't have the time to step back far enough. And that's something John Kotter was saying right at the beginning of his of the podcast today. He was like, sometimes you just do not have the time to step back far enough from the coalface so that you can see the wood from the trees, all these old metaphors, so that you can reassess really where you're at. And I think that's what we try doing. And this is what the show's about. This is what the book is about. It's what the show is about. But it's also when we decided to launch the workshops, it was very much what the workshops are about as well. So if you want to come along and be challenged, if you want to just take 24 hours out to actually rethink, then come and join us at one of the workshops that we're running in 2019. And we will be running it in 2020 as well. So it'd be great to see you there. Finally, I'm looking for a listener or two to come on the show. Now, as a listener, you've got to be somebody that works for an organization. You're either responsible for education and awareness from a CISO perspective, or you're responsible for education and awareness in the sense of your responsibility for education awareness management and how do you implement the strategy within an organization. So we're looking for listeners that have that sort of background to come on the show and basically share with us what they've learned from the last 3 episodes, also really to share their own insights into the challenges around awareness, behavior, and culture. How can you put your name forward? Really, really simple. Send us an email. Send me an email specifically at podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. Let me repeat that. podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. So ping that over to me. I'll get back to you, and we can maybe arrange a Skype call to have a chat and just talk through exactly what it is that we require. It'd be great to have you here on the show. So the next podcast out will be in a couple of weeks' time. I really do hope that you can join us for that. In the meantime, carry on being awesome when it comes to awareness, behavior, culture. And I look forward to getting a guest on the show, sharing the insights from that interview in a couple of weeks' time. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.